Finally, this review is done. I think you guys are going to like it, so let's get started.
And all I feel is blue. Black.
So, what are we reviewing today? We're reviewing the 2018 13-inch Macbook Pro with Touch Bar. Now, I've used this product for about a month so far, from September 22nd to October 22nd, to fully determine my views on the product as it stands. Making the distinction of 2018 because I want to state this is the updated version of the 2016 MacBook Pro with a couple of fixes, like the fixed membrane keyboard that was having an issue, updated 8th Gen Intel, so you don't have to worry about that, and the True Tone display, so nobody gets confused. Now, if you've seen any of my other reviews, the structure is pretty much the same, but for those who haven't, I'm going to be looking at the specs first, arguably the least important part of the review, then going into things like the build quality, keyboard, trackpad, some of the external stuff. Then I'm going to be talking about the performance and how it runs in different tasks, comment my 5 things that I like and 5 things I dislike about the device. Finally, at the end, we're going to be going into price and the final verdict. So, without further ado, let's get started with the specs. The specs of the MacBook Pro 2018 are as follows. For a CPU, it has a quad-core 8th Gen Intel i5 CPU with integrated graphics of the Intel Iris 655 variety, 8 GB of DDR3 RAM, a 2.2K resolution Retina display, or a 2560 by 1600 pixel display, 256 GB of PCIe based SSD, as well as aluminum unibody design. From the moment you take it out of the box, there's a distinctive cleanliness about it. The round corners and full aluminum unibody finish convey a high build quality feeling. This is carried on to the inner parts of the laptop as well. The etchings around the trackpad and the latch are very well built and very sturdy as they etch inward, and the blend very nicely together. Looking at the bottom of the device, the small plastic stubs help it sit on a table or a chair without moving too much or falling over, and the openings for the air dispersion are tucked away nicely into the design of the frame instead of being plopped on there. Enough about the build quality, let's look at the trackpad. You may not think of it, but the most important part of a laptop is the quality and stability / usability of the trackpad. It's the thing you use every day to get around the interface, and I'm happy to report the MacBook Pro's trackpad is the best I've ever seen in a laptop. Big size allows you to travel farther without having to reconfigure your arms like other traditional smaller trackpads do. The smoothness and precision of the clicks are easily recognized instead of accidentally clicking on something that you don't want to, and somewhat configurable through the settings, which you can change the force click and what it does as well as what the secondary click does. Relatively new feature, the force click, allows you to press and hold on the trackpad to look up a word in this little dialog box. Look up a word, phrase, person, or other, giving you quick access to things like a Wikipedia, news, movies, or anything related to the topic of the word that you searched. Onto the keyboard. This is a pretty divisive one, as the MacBook Pro's new keyboard low-profile design has been very controversial in the ways that's been being reviewed so far. So the keyboard for this year's MacBook Pro is the same one used on the 2016 models, and it's a low-profile keyboard, which means it's a low travel for each keystroke, and it's flush with the laptop instead of any of the keys, say, jutting out. In practice, being able to use this is a little bit more of a different typing style than what you're used to, so you don't have to hit the keys as hard, which I personally like, but a bunch of people don't like. It's backlit, which is pretty great, so if it's in the dark or whatever and you need to look at your keys, you can just increase or decrease the backlit ability of the keys as well as the surrounding keycaps. And overall, it's a pretty average to type on. Apple did, with these 2018 models, add a hidden rubber mesh under each key to prevent crumbs and dust from getting into the sockets, which end up breaking the keys beforehand in the 2016 earlier models of if any dust went in there, just break it. The keys wouldn't work, but unfortunately that was only available for this year's models, and the 2016 ones don't have it. Overall, pretty standard keyboard, and I don't hate it as much as everyone else does. Moving on to the display, yes, I left the touch bar for last. The display is a beautiful 2560 by 1600 Retina display, which is a little bit over 2K. I'd say about 2.2, 2.3K, but in practice it looks so much better than a standard 2K screen. The Retina display that they use allows words and fonts to look very smooth and natural versus normal displays, which they look pretty pixelated at super close up. With this, you should be able to see that that is not the case. And while colors burst on it, very color accurate, it never overpowers. Like some AMOLED screens on phones, they never overpower. Apple has very good color science. Also, if you're wondering about the large bezel on the top, people are kind of turned off about that as well. It's a 2014 weird laptop. No, it's actually for use. It was the webcam, obviously, but also the True Tone sensors. True Tone's a interesting technology that's available on the 2018 MacBook Pros, which pretty much combine the automatic brightness that you'd see in most phones and laptop and stuff with a nightlight mode on Windows into a sensory system. So it pretty much automatically adjusts the color temperature of the screen depending on the light coming from in and around it in its environment, and adjusts that based on that light to give you a more comfortable viewing brightness as well as color temperature. But more on that later, even though it works pretty well most of the time. Onto the speakers of the MacBook Pro. I'm not an audiophile. I don't have all these speaker things memorized. I'm not going to show you the weird decimal counts, but I can report they're pretty good speakers. The volume gets loud enough and doesn't get pitchy at high volumes. It's not tinny. There's no distortion involved. It also doesn't really interfere with the keyboard or any other parts of the computer. They're very conveniently off to the edges, and they work pretty well. Lastly, before we get to the touch bar, I want to comment on the battery life. Macs have always tended to have excellent battery life, and the 2018 MacBook Pro is no exception. It is no different. One issue I've always had with Windows laptops is the battery life. The moment you keep it plugged in for more than, I'd say, a week or two, the battery life shoots from the predicted, in quotes, 10 hours around to the 2-hour mark that I've had consistently with all those laptops. MacBook Pro doesn't do that, and I've kept this thing plugged in overnight and through the day when I'm not using it, and I've seen no difference in the battery life. It still gets the predicted 8.5 to 9.5 hours of on-screen time. Okay, now on to the touch bar, the thing everyone's been wanting to know. So first, what is the touch bar? The touch bar is a dynamic changing screen on top of the keyboard, which places the function keys, the escape key, the volume, backlight, and the screen brightness keys, all of which buttons have been replaced with a digital version, as well as the addition of the Siri button and the Touch ID button for a benefit. The touch bar changes depending on the app you're using. So for instance, if you're using Safari, the bar will change to show you the forward and back arrows, the search icon, the current tabs that you have opened, the new tab or added tab icon, as well as the sidebar with the other information like the brightness and the Hello Siri stuff, as you can see by the video being shown. But the other cool thing is with a few select programs, the touch bar does some interesting things. So if the rinse result 15 I use, it has all the sort of base icons right there that you have at the top of the screen. But other than a few select programs like the ones I just mentioned, one specifically designed from Apple, not a lot of programs end up using the touch bar for anything, and so it end up being pretty useless. I mean, it's cool when you want to have a new tab open, you just press it, or when you have accept, OK, move to trash, any of those things, you can just click on it on the screen. But overall, it's not something I would use every day for really anything. I think it really has great potential that Apple really didn't use it for. Other than some cool implementations, for now, I think it's pretty much just a gimmick. And unfortunately, there is currently no way to turn this off. Okay, that's it for the externals of the device. Now let's move on to some performance-based tests. Unlike other reviews in the same vein, I'm not going to show you benchmarks or scoring sheets, or how they compare to the competition, because overall that shouldn't matter. What matters is how you personally use the device and the performance you get out for the tasks that you use it for. For my use, video editing, coding, graphic design, web browsing, for all the tasks I mentioned, the MacBook Pro works exceptionally well. It's fast enough processing for video editing, combined with the speedy updating of the SSD, macOS smooth download and import features, as well as the use of well-integrated Safari and trackpad, make my tasks a breeze. No slowdown or waiting for things to work. That said, this is not a gaming laptop. You will not be running games on this device. It is not meant for gaming, therefore it's not going to run well. Also to note, I haven't been noticing the laptop getting very hot while using it, but I suspect if you do longer video editing sessions or rendering, heat could be a problem. Not so much overheating, just could be wary of the power consumption that you use on certain tasks. One last thing there is to note is that there's no dedicated graphics card on this machine. It's running integrated Intel Iris 655, so keep that in mind when you're doing intensive procedures like 3D modeling, rendering, and such. I'd suggest use one specifically designed for Macs or made by Apple. Those generally are designed with that factor in mind, that they do not have a dedicated source for graphical input. Okay, now heading into the 5 things I like and 5 things I dislike about this MacBook Pro. I'll start with the good and then go to the bad. Something I love about the MacBook Pro that not many people seem to realize, or people overlook in the review, is how good the startup is. On Windows, primarily after being shut down, Windows takes a long time to turn on, load the lock screen, load the password, set up, and then finally log you into the computer. I have timed my Windows machine, keeping in mind that's not a power issue since I have a GTX 1080 and all this other stuff correctly configured. And from fully shut down to being able to be opening up Chrome, which means having everything start up, having it have the whole boot process, waiting for all the things like the all startup stuff, the whole taskbar, Wi-Fi things to work, it takes around 7 minutes compared to the Mac startup, which takes around 3 minutes. It might not seem like a lot, but over time, it gets annoying pretty quickly. The extra 4 minutes really ends up mattering. I'm going to run through the rest of it pretty quickly. So, Mac OS, I love the UI, the ease of use. I love how there's no load times or app startups, simple and clean. Works very well with all the other Apple apps, and I'm surprised at just how well it allows you to just be free, which is something that's a little bit unique for Apple. The build quality is really nice. All Unibody design allows, or Unibody design, which means that there's no seams or no collective parts or sharp edges. So, for instance, if you have a normal computer that's made of like plastic or whatever, you'll have a seam cut out where they added the two parts together, which would get dirt or other stuff in there, and it just makes it for an unpleasant experience when you lug around something that feels like that. But because of the Unibody design, it's clean, sturdy, and it feels really nice. The SSD is something, or the SSD or the solid state drive is something I wanted to talk about because I feel like it's pretty important. Although it's only a 256 gigabyte drive, it's the fastest one ever on a laptop. Apps load really quickly and downloads are pretty instant. Transferring data is lightning fast, and the best part is it's reliable because SSDs don't have moving part or disk spinning like hard drives do or HDDs do. So you're able to have things last longer and be more reliable without breaking down. I'd say some specs on this. The write speed and read speed are about 3.2 to 4.2 gigabytes a second. Yes, you heard that right, gigabytes a second. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the good is portability. It's super portable, can be thrown in a bag anywhere, opens easily, and has an even weight distribution, not heavier on one side than the other. Doesn't feel too bulky in places, and it's just a nice, clean design that I really appreciate. The bad. So actually I only have 4 complaints about this device for being bad, but they're kind of big. So first off, the ports. I opted for the touch bar model, so I got 4 Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports, which is pretty great. For connecting and charging things, as like connecting an external display, and other things that require USB-C, which is great. But the issue is not so much for connecting other devices that haven't really made the switch to USB-C, like mice, keyboards, USB drives, or anything that uses the USB Type A, which is most products currently. I don't know why. And since Apple doesn't include an adapter in the box, you have to buy one of those separately. Second, the True Tone. This is somewhat of a minor complaint, but I did want to bring it up. When I was using it, I saw that in well-lit areas or ones that have moving shadows, the True Tone can sometimes get confused on what it's trying to do. It will change the brightness and color of the screen to either too bright or too dim when in the opposite area. Like if there's a moving shadow behind you from a person or whatever, if there's sun coming in, if it's in that shadow, it will all of a sudden drop the brightness completely to 0 and you won't be able to see anything, and then it doesn't update until you try to update it, and then it will just revert back to what it was originally. So I think that's not too good. Third thing, the touch bar. So as much as I want not to hate this thing, after seeing all the hate and annoyance it got towards it, everyone's like, oh my god, this is the worst edition ever. Unfortunately, I would have to agree. So I really wish I could turn it off at least in most of the moments. It's there. It's not too bad. Like I'd use it for some things, but it feels excessive. It feels like it's a requirement, unfortunately, if you're going to future-proof yourself, and I don't like that. I feel like it's a gimmick in most senses, and it doesn't feel like it should be something required by MacBook Pro users to have. And finally, my fourth complaint, and one of the biggest ones, is price. So here we go. This is going to wrap up my fourth complaint, as well as the price thing that we're going to be talking about, and the verdict. So let's finish this up. My last sentence about future proofing was a little vague, so I guess I'll explain. Apple updated the MacBook Pro for 2018 by adding a new touch bar model, updated the CPU, 8th Gen Intel, added Series support, more ports, better SSD, the membrane under everything, and overall I think it's a great upgrade. But they didn't end up upgrading that stuff to the non-touch bar models of the device, which still run 7th Gen Intel, basically forcing you to buy a touch bar model if you want it to last longer than like a year or two, being future-proofed and not having to upgrade again because your system is out of date. The only issue is that the base model for the touch bar starts at $1,700, which is what I bought this for, and that is a big issue when you look at comparator prices like the Dell XPS 15, which comparably spec'd I've searched is around $1,400. dollars for around the same thing. Although you do get Intel 620 instead of 655. But everything else is prevalent, same specs, except you get a 4K screen. So that's that. But it does beg the question: is Apple's worth the extra $300? Unfortunately, I would have to say no. It only comes with 8 gigs of RAM, and it's not even DDR4 RAM, which in 2018 I feel like is kind of unacceptable. If you're getting RAM, it should be DDR4, it should be fast, it should be reliable. And although the SSD is great, the upgrade cost from going to a 256GB SSD to a 512GB is around $200, $300. That's just unacceptable when you could buy a 512GB SSD from Samsung for around $330. And it just feels like you're already paying a lot for the SSD, you might as well not have to pay more, considering it's soldered into the motherboard, which means you can't take it out and get a new one whenever you want. The MacBook Pro doesn't have a dedicated graphics card and still runs Intel Iris 655, which isn't good for things that require a lot of GPU power, so, no gaming, but also certain rendering tasks and things with certain programs don't work too well. And also limited ports, which limited USB-C ports, force you into buying dongles or adapters, which Apple, of course, does not provide you. So overall, what do I think? What is the verdict that I would give to this product? Let me start off by saying this. I love my MacBook Pro. Even if it's overpriced, I still love it. I love the usability, the portability of it, the way it just works. I don't have to deal with Windows updates. I don't have to deal with all this Windows garbage. I don't have to deal with it advertising me stuff. And I just like the overall experience of it a lot better than Windows. But in order for me to recommend a product like this, it needs to be for everyone, or at least most people. In this case, it just isn't. This device is for certain people. People who video edit, coders, photographers, artists, graphic designers, creators. Not the average consumer. I'd say the MacBook Air that just got released is more for the average consumer to just browse the web or YouTube or do whatever they want that MacBook for. But MacBook Pro is not the thing that you need to do that. If you don't want a Mac, use Windows. Dell XPS 15 works just fine, and I hope Apple will learn from this. The overall verdict is that I would love to recommend it, but unfortunately I can't. It is around $1,700, and hey, if you want to get this, if you are one of those people I described, go for it. I think it's a great idea. I don't think Windows could compete in this market, but I do think Apple should learn a couple things from the competition. How the fact that their stuff being overpriced as it isn't going to bring in more people. And regardless of what everyone else says, as long as you personally like the product, and for me, I personally love my MacBook Pro, it's worth majority of what I paid for. It's not worth the full $1,700. I'd say it's worth around $1,500. That all depends on who you ask. So yeah, I'd say just be careful. If you want this, great. It's not for everyone. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. That's my verdict. So yeah, for that master review, I hope you all enjoyed, and see you all next time. Goodbye.